protected from disease by the vaccine. As we learn more and more, which we will, and the evidence gets better and better, that a vaccinated person has a much lesser chance of getting infected asymptomatically. And even if they do, the virus is very likely very low in the nasopharynx. When those data become clear, the CDC, those being a science-based organization, will use that scientific data to say, now a vaccinated person can actually walk around without a mask. There's another issue also, one other thing, sir, let me say, that's important, is that there are variants that are circulating too. And we want to make sure that if you have full protection against one type of a virus, that a variant might come along that might escape the protection. So if you want full protection and you're out in the community where there's a lot of virus out there, that's why we still recommend wearing a mask. And in answer to question before, when you get the level of virus really low, all of that's going to go away, and you're not going to have any very, very little risk. Therefore, people will not have to wear masks.
Got it. Let me show you this chart, Dr. Fauci. It's of the United States. It's a map created by the CDC. Basically what it does is it shows the highest incidence of COVID since the start of the pandemic. The darkest blue is where COVID rates were the highest per 100,000 residents. There are 4 in the middle of the country: North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Tennessee. I want to direct your attention to South Dakota for one moment. The governor of that state is a woman named Kristi Noem. Governor Noem said the following: we never instituted a shelter-in-place order. We never mandated that people wear masks. We never defined what an essential business is. That's what she said at something called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference in February. And in fact, she invoked you during that speech, and she said, I don't know if you agree with me, but Dr. Fauci is wrong a lot. And then you responded saying, the numbers in South Dakota, quote unquote, don't lie. What did you mean by that?
Well, at the same time that the governor was saying that, if you look at the number of hospitalizations and deaths per population, South Dakota is way up there in that particular category. So I don't think that's a good track record.
That's not a successful administration of COVID-19, correct?
Excuse me?
That is not a successful handling of COVID-19, correct?
If you're using hospitalizations and deaths as a parameter, that's not very successful.
Dr. Walensky, there was something called the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota. 460,000 people showed up. No one was wearing masks. In a CDC study, in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, it was found that 34% of counties in Minnesota experienced COVID-19 cases related to the Sturgis rally. Dr. Walensky, is it fair to say that what happened in South Dakota with regard to not adopting restrictive measures on COVID-19 caused deaths in Minnesota?
We were very worried when people came to that rally that they would get infected and bring it home. So I can't tell you the individuals, but that was the deep concern at the time.
And you can't rule out deaths in Minnesota related to the Sturgis rally?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, the chair. And now we'll move to a second round of questions. And I now recognize Mr. Scalise for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And at first, I know it's been talked about a lot on what percentages should be or shouldn't be vaccinated. I'd push back on the suggestion that Americans only get their liberties back if a certain percentage of members of Congress get vaccinated. I would like to use the science. I'm talking about medical science now, not political science on this. Let's start with schools. Dr. Walensky, you've talked about this a few times, but you were quoted as saying, quote, safe reopening of schools does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen safely, end quote. CDC's since put out guidance that talks about the things that need to happen to reopen schools. It's really focused on social distancing and wearing masks. I don't even think y'all mentioned vaccinations. And teachers should be prioritized, and most states are prioritized for vaccinations, but the CDC guidance doesn't mention it. Do you still stand by the statement that you made that safe reopening of schools does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen? Could you?
ACIP recommends teacher and educator vaccination.
But you're the CDC director. What's your recommendation? Do you stand by what you said?
The CDC guidance specifically
Let me ask specifically about what you said, that statement I just read. Do you still stand by that statement?
I
yes
do.
or no? You do, okay. And Dr. Fauci, you've also made comments about the CDC guidance on schools. You were asked about school reopenings, and you said, quote, I would back the CDC recommendations because that is really based on data. And you just heard the CDC director said that safely reopening schools should really be conditioned upon the social distancing and on masks. Do you stand by that as well? I can't hear. If you can turn your microphone on, please.
Yes.
So you do stand by that. So again, vaccinations should be available to all teachers. Most states are doing it. Those that aren't should prioritize teachers. But reopening schools should really be based on that science, right? The medical science that social distancing and mask protocols are what drives that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I would imagine you acknowledge, as I've seen so much medical data that shows the damage. You know, we've talked about COVID deaths, and they're all tragic. We've seen a lot of other deaths in America. Deaths tied to depression because people can't go about their lives. That's a real factor. We've seen so many young kids, millions today that still can't go back in the classroom, not because of medical science, because of political science that is destroying these kids' lives. Do you recognize that it is causing depression, drug overdoses, drug abuse for kids tied to some of those decisions?
The psychological effects of keeping children out of school are well known. It definitely is not something that is favorable for children. It is much to their advantage to be in school.
Well, I appreciate that. And I hope that all of the school systems across America follow the medical science and stop this political science destruction of kids. Trying to hide behind science when, in fact, as the CDC director just said, Dr. Fauci just said, schools absolutely should reopen. The CDC guidance is very clear on what it takes to reopen, and it's social distancing and masks. Follow that medical science. Now I want to get back to the pictures that I showed earlier about the Donna Detention Facility. And so now you've both had a chance to see them. You both look. Let me just ask you, if it's a restaurant in any state, if a restaurant is set at 250 person capacity and there's 4,000 people in a restaurant that's set for 250 person capacity, Dr. Fauci, would you consider that a major concern, and probably wouldn't that restaurant be shut down?
It would be a major concern, yes.
So you go to the Donna Detention Facility today, and I was just there Friday morning, 6 days ago, in Donna, Texas, at that detention facility, rated for 250 people. Border Patrol told us there were over 4,000 people, young kids, in that facility that day, 6 days ago, not 6 feet apart, as you can see, in most cases 6 inches apart, many without masks. Do you consider this a major concern?
Yes.
So again, and I would urge you, because you have closer access to President Biden than I do, I really want President Biden to go see this. He ought to see this. He won't see it. Vice President Harris won't see it. You've seen it. You know what the science says, the medical science. Could you please urge President Biden? He can fix this right now. There are 3 major things he did. The Remain in Mexico policy was working. Every Border Patrol agent tells you that. President Biden got rid of it. It's caused this magnet of these young people being exploited, abused, exposed to COVID. They say at least 10% of these kids are COVID positive. If you look at these conditions and 10% of the people in this room are COVID positive, do you think ultimately way more than 10% will get COVID and then get on an airplane without a COVID test, as they're being done, sent around the country? Is that a major concern? Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, that would be a major concern, yes.
It's happening right now. It needs to end. President Biden can end this today. He needs to stop this national health crisis and the super spreader COVID event that he's created at our southern border. I yield back.
May I just add one thing, Representative, and just for the record to show that our school guidance does in fact speak to vaccination. We have layered mitigation strategies. We say it's not conditional upon safe reopening of school,
But not
we do speak.
conditional. The guidance clearly, socially distanced, wear masks, reopen schools today. Thank you for that.
Thank you. The chair now wishes to accommodate the schedule of Mr. Raskin, and we're going to yield to him.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very grateful to you. Dr. Walensky, your predecessor, Dr. Redfield, admitted recently that he was repeatedly instructed by Trump administration officials to pressure and change scientific reports, the data, the conclusions, the recommendations. As the new CDC director, do you think it's a danger to public health to have political appointees from outside the agency dictating findings and conclusions to CDC scientists?
I have let the American people know that the CDC is going to be led by science and our subject matter experts that review that science. When I became CDC director on January 20th, I asked Dr. Ann Schuchat, my principal deputy, to review all of the guidance that was on the CDC website related to COVID and to ensure that it was backed by our CDC experts and our subject matter experts. And in that review, 3 pieces of guidance came down. 2 had actually come down prior to my arrival and 1 soon thereafter.
Well, I think the American people can rest assured that we're in the hands of real science now and not the right-wing political science being dictated by the Trump administration. Dr. Fauci, I want to follow up on a line of questioning that Mr. Scalise began about whether you would have a major concern in certain situations. Donald Trump mobilized a crowd of tens of thousands of people to stop the steal on the false allegation that he'd actually won the 2020 presidential election. I think this is decisive refutation in itself that people have been able to exercise their First Amendment liberties to assemble and speak and so on. But then at least 800 or 900 of them went way beyond their legitimate First Amendment liberties. They stormed the Capitol, they broke windows, they assaulted police officers, the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police Department. Over 90% of these people, closer to 100%, did not have masks on. And do you think that this caused a super spreader event? Because hundreds of Capitol officers and MPD officers and others have come down with COVID-19 since the violent insurrection unleashed against the Capitol in an attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. Would that be a major concern for you too?
You know, as I've said many times, that any congregate setting where you have massive numbers of people who are not wearing masks always poses a risk for a super spreader situation, regardless of where that congregation is.
Well, these people were pressed up against each other. They were coughing, spitting. There was tear gas in the air. A lot of them had brought bear mace. They were assaulting police officers face to face. We have lots of photo footage of it. I didn't bring the photos this time, but I will, just because I know Mr. Scalise will be extremely concerned about it when he sees the photographs of what that mob was doing. Would you consider that something really dangerous for people to do, to show up without masks, to be assaulting police officers, to be screaming, chanting, yelling, all in the context of people also coughing and sneezing because of tear gas, mace, bear mace, and other chemical irritants brought by these domestic violent extremists?
You know, as I've said, Congressman Raskin, any kind of congregate setting where you have that type of a circumstance where people are crowded together without masks definitely poses a risk for a super spreader event.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Kessler, let me ask you this. The vaccines are a remarkable triumph for science and investment in scientific research and development. They are a decisive refutation of all the anti-scientific propaganda, irrationalism, magical thinking, wishful thinking that we saw over the last 4 years. And yet that same kind of anti-scientific dogma now proves to be a blockade to our ability to make progress on a whole host of other problems, like gun violence, for example, where there are people who don't want us to have scientific research on gun violence as a public health epidemic, like climate change, where there are people who are denying the overwhelming weight of scientific consensus. Would you speak generally to the problem of people placing their ideological agendas above the findings of scientists?
Congressman, there were 769 deaths yesterday, approximately, from COVID-19. I don't know where we're going to be in May, June, July with those number of deaths. I mean, every time we've looked at the epidemiology, we are humbled because we can't predict the direction. But the thing that I am absolutely certain is that if we want to take that number of deaths down, if we want to get back to normal, to every American, please, please be vaccinated. Ideology, whatever your concerns, these are very safe and effective vaccines. Let's get everyone vaccinated.
We will take that to heart, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling the hearing.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, American citizens, some of who've lost their businesses because of lockdowns imposed due to the virus, and who've been told for a year they can't go to church, can't go to work, can't go to school, can't go to a loved one's funeral, can't go to their United States Capitol to petition their government, and if they dare speak anything that's contrary to what you've said or CDC has said, they get censored, as evidenced by the governor from our third largest state just last week facing that situation. All the while, as the ranking member, Mr. Scalise has pointed out, migrants enter the country illegally from 60 different countries. They're processed, put on a plane, paid for by the American taxpayers without getting tested, flown somewhere or bused somewhere in the country. Just doesn't hardly seem fair. And so I'll go back to the question I asked the first round. Can you give us a specific measurement that will have to be attained, some outcome, some result that we have to reach, so that Americans know they're going to get their liberties back and be able to move on with their lives?
You're asking for a number. If I have a number, it would have to be my best estimate, and that would be that the number of infections per day are well below 10,000 per day. At that point, and up to that point, there would be a gradual pulling back of some of the restrictions you're talking about, particularly when people are vaccinated more and more, because it's a combination of, if you're vaccinated, you're protecting yourself for sure, and the more people that get vaccinated in the community, the lower the level of infection will be.
I understand. Well, give us an idea. I mean, look, you've given us thoughts on all kinds of subjects. You've opined on all kinds of issues. Give us your best guess then.
I just did.
No, you didn't. You didn't give us a time. When do you think this is going? Are we going to be here 2 years from now wearing masks?
No,
Jim Jordan asked Dr. Fauci the same question.
Well, let me end your ranting again. Let me
No,
just.
I'm not ranting.
Yes, you are.
No, here's how it works, Dr. Fauci.
Right.
I get to ask you the questions. You're the highest paid official in the United States government. You've given us your advice on baseball, on dating apps, on cruise ships. You told us 0 masks, 1 mask, 2 masks, now back to 1 mask. I'm just asking you, when is it going to end? You can say I'm ranting. I'm actually asking the question that the citizens I get the privilege of representing, and my name actually goes on a ballot. I don't think your name's ever been on a ballot. My name goes on a ballot. The citizens I represent want to know the answer to when they can get their liberties back.
You know,
You can call that ranting. I actually call it standing up for the Constitution, which I take an oath to uphold, Dr. Fauci, every year, every term that I serve in this Congress representing the folks in the 4th District of Ohio. So it is not ranting. It is defending the First Amendment.
Badgering.
And we'd like an answer, or your best guess, since you got an answer for everything else.
Well, when we get the people in this country vaccinated, the overwhelming majority of the people in the country, and we project that will very likely be sometime in the beginning to mid of the summer. Because as the president has said, when we get to the end of May, there will be enough vaccinations to vaccinate everybody in the country. It will, the reason I can't give you a precise number, because I'm not 100% sure how many people will want to be vaccinated. That's what I'm saying. If you get the overwhelming number of people
You gave us a guess on Texas. Look at the chart here. This is 7-day average of case rate per 100,000 people. You gave us your guess on Texas. You said when Texas ended their lockdown, ended their mandate, that this was, quote, inexplicable and would lead to a surge in cases. Texas is near the bottom of the 50 states, but all the states at the top are lockdown states. So how great was that? That guess didn't seem to be too good. What explains why Texas is so darn low compared to the rest of the states? Lockdown states have a much higher case rate than the state of Texas, which is over a month ago now, said we're not going to lock down, we're not going to have all these mandates that you say we have to have.
Yeah, there's a difference between lockdown and the people obeying the lockdown. You know, you could have a situation where they say, we're going to lock down, and yet you have people doing exactly what they want to do.
Is that what is happening in the top 8 states in the country? They're just not following what's been told. They're not listening to Dr. Fauci.
I'm sorry, you're speaking so fast, I'm not even hearing what you're saying.
Well, you can look at the numbers.
I can't see that, it's too far away.
Okay, well, Michigan's at 551 cases per 100,000. Texas is at 77. Wisconsin's at 109 because their state Supreme Court overruled their governor, their Republican court, and said, we're not going to have a lockdown in Wisconsin. And their numbers are 5 times lower than the state of Michigan, which is right next door.
The German time has expired.
But Mr. Chairman, it's typical when there's a question on the table that the witness gets a chance to respond to that last question. I want to know why. Why Wisconsin's at 109 and right next door, Michigan's at 551. Michigan is locked down and Wisconsin isn't.
I think the gentleman answered you quite clearly.
He didn't answer that.
There's a big difference in being a lockdown state by order and being a state that obeys orders. That answered the question, in my opinion. And with that, the chair recognizes Mr. Christopher Morphy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Fauci, the #1 Facebook post today about vaccines is Tucker Carlson's, suggesting they don't work, going back to our exchange from before. There are calls now to take down his post by Facebook because it's become the most engaged post and fueling the anti-vaxxer movement online. Would you, it seems appropriate given what big tech needs to do to take down these anti-vaxxer claims, to take down Tucker Carlson's Facebook post as well. What do you think?
You know, Congressman, I'm really not expert enough about
Okay,
what
Dr.
should be
Kessler,
taken down.
Dr. Kessler, this is your beat, vaccine hesitancy. If this is as serious a anti-vaxxer claim and it's getting the engagement it should, shouldn't we take down this Facebook post?
Vaccines work. Any suggestion that they don't would be false and misleading. And I would ask, we've been sitting here, I would just ask that all members of this committee reinforce that point to the American people.
Dr. Fauci, with regard to Facebook, Chelsea Clinton has now called for this Facebook post to be taken down and numerous others. How about you?
You know, when I was trying to answer the question when you switched over to Dr. Kessler, I'm not an expert enough on what liberty should or should not be encroached upon by taking things down from Facebook. I don't want to go on the record and say something should be taken down from Facebook because that's not my area of expertise. What one can or cannot take down from Facebook. I can comment that I certainly disagree with what he said, and I made it very clear that I disagree with what he said.
And should he retract his statements?
Should he what?
Should Tucker Carlson retract his statements in light of your testimony today?
You know, I wish that he would not have said it. I don't want to get into a back and forth because that's what happened between me and Tucker Carlson. I am too busy doing my job to going back and forth with people like Tucker Carlson. He could say what he wants to say. I wish he would not. I don't think it's productive.
Given what he has said and what he has posted on Facebook and social media, do you believe that it advances or sets back our drive to vaccinate the population?
Well, the statement he made is that he doesn't, then it looks like the vaccines might not be working. The implication was, since you're asking us to wear masks, the vaccine might not be working. My comment to that is that the vaccines were shown, the mRNA vaccines, to be between 94 and 95% effective. So my answer to him is merely one of data. Look at the data. The vaccines are highly efficacious and have been shown in the field to be highly effective. In fact, that was the third or fourth or fifth slide
No, but
in my
it's a
presentation.
simple question, Dr. Fauci. Are his statements advancing the cause of getting us to the point where we can remove our masks and quote unquote exercise our liberties, or are we now setting back the program of getting to that state?
His statements are certainly not advancing the cause of trying to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can.
Dr. Kessler, you said that each week we're going to be delivering, or we are delivering 28 million doses of vaccine. And I assume that the demand right now meets the supply. But at some point you said it's going to plateau. And when do you expect the demand to be less than the supply?
I think over the next number of weeks.
So we'll be gathering a surplus of vaccines at that point?
We are a diverse country, and there's going to be areas where there's appointments that will go unfilled, and there will be areas of the country where it's still going to be hard to get an appointment. But I think we're getting to that inflection point, and I think we all have to individually work hard and personally to talk to people, listen to people, understand people's fears, people's concerns. We have a big job ahead of us if we're going to get.
If we have surplus vaccines at some point where the demand is less than the supply and it's just gathering, what are the contingency plans to do with those surplus vaccines?
We are going to work day and night, and we are to build further confidence in the American people. We know the most important thing that we can do is to invest in trusted messengers across the country. We're leading with the science. I think you've seen that this week's actions should give the American people increased confidence in the FDA and the CDC. We have a big job ahead of us, and we're not going to stop until we've vaccinated everybody that we can.
Will the gentleman from Illinois yield for a question?
Go ahead.
Gentleman yield?
Time has expired.
I can't yield you anything, but go ahead.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Dr. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to begin round two here by thanking Representative Bill Foster for his allowing me to partner with him on the GAO task force. Bill and I don't agree on a lot of political positions, but I've grown to deeply respect his scientific knowledge and his management skills as he's worked with them to make sure contracts were appropriate, operations of what Operation Warp Speed went well. And he and I did agree on sending a letter to the administration asking that we use one dose for Moderna and Pfizer until everyone's vaccinated. I still believe that's a strong position. The data from particularly our allies has shown that to be very true. Secondly, someone earlier mentioned that Tennessee's infection rate, basically mentioned our infection rate in an effort to imply that open states performed more poorly than closed states. But a simple glance at the per capita death rate paints a very clear picture that there is minimal correlation, if any, between deaths and closures and mask mandates. Florida, for example, is the third largest state. It ranks 28th in per capita deaths. Tennessee's the 16th in population, and we are 21st in per capita deaths. That's consistent across all the states. There just isn't correlation. Those statistics need to be checked and confirmed, or what was said earlier should be. Someone else asked this question earlier, and I think it's worth mentioning again. Do such conditions that were described at the Donna facility on the border conform to current CDC guidelines? The answer was very clear. It doesn't, and that begs the question, how is it okay to let 600 plus children lay row on row, shoulder to shoulder, yet the NEA says we still can't send Americans back to school? I think that's a question that we should be asking the National Teachers Association. I'm sorry. That's very frustrating to see this continued push to keep kids out of school but it seems to be okay that we let them languish in those facilities on the border. Dr. Fauci, I have a question for you, and I'd like for you, if you could, to elaborate. I'm surprised no one's asked this question yet, and it's about the J&J vaccine. I, too, am one of those folks who believe that the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, I've looked very hard at the data on those. Those are safe. I took the first vaccine myself. I'm holding on the second to keep consistent with Dr. Foster and my push to have one vaccine first. But you recently made some comments about the J&J vaccine. As I understand it, there were only 6 cases of clots, and out of several million, 7 or 8 million that have been administered. I'd love for you to elaborate on this, because I'm very concerned that this halt, or what you've said about the halt, has probably contributed to things like these Facebook posts and others who are concerned about vaccine safety. So if you could kind of comment on the incidence of this clot versus the number of vaccines, and then the pause and what it may be communicating to people about the safety of the vaccines.
Thank you very much for that question. It's an important question. So the CDC and the FDA made a determination when they saw the accumulation of 6, a relatively small number, of this really quite devastating complication of an adverse event of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis with thrombocytopenia. And they did it, as they have stated very clearly, even though it is a very low level when you look at it, the number as of now would be like less than 1 per million. They did it out of an abundance of caution and called it a pause to be able to do 2 things. 1, to examine it more carefully, to make sure that there are not a lot more out there, and to alert physicians to be on the lookout for this. But also another important component of it is that if there are more of these situations where people have this and they come to a physician, if the physicians are not aware of it, they may treat the person inappropriately, because this is a clotting situation, and the standard way to treat a thrombosis is with an anticoagulant called heparin. However, in this case, heparin is contraindicated because it could actually make the situation worse. So there were 2 reasons to do it. 1, out of an abundance of caution to see what we're dealing with, and B, to make sure they alert physicians about what to do with it. Hopefully, we'll get a decision quite soon as to whether or not we can get back on track with this very effective vaccine.
I'd love for you, though, sir, to just in your future comments about it, be very careful, because I think they are contributing to some of this vaccine hesitancy. And if I could ask you to do that in the future, just a request. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Mr. Foster for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And just one quick question on the last subject. In your epidemiological modeling, what is the difference in the projected total mortality by the time that the pandemic burns out because of the delay that's implied by a delay in the J&J vaccine? And if you don't have a just offhand answer to that, if you could answer that for the record, it would be very, very informative, because that's the trade-off, as I perceive it, between the risk of those 1 in a million of people who would be at risk otherwise. And now I'll change back to our favorite subject here. I just want to thank you for your testimony about the long-term federal investments in science that were so crucial to getting out from under this pandemic. I've been out of science and at this crazy business for about 12 years now, and I cannot count the number of times that we Democrats have had to compromise in negotiations or give up things that we care about to defend the scientific budgets against the cuts proposed and voted for by Republicans, from Paul Ryan to Mick Mulvaney to Donald Trump. Well, that's my rant, and there's no need for you to comment on this. But now what I would like to ask you about are next generation vaccines. These may be really important, both for boosters in the US in the future and for the rest of the world to keep new variants from coming back at us from offshore. And I've been reading about all these great concepts for next gen vaccines, the self-amplifying mRNA vaccines, the nose spritz, which could be much better for vaccine hesitancy. Oral vaccines, which will be obviously great for convenience and for vaccine hesitancy. And then all these neat things like the electrophoresis devices for DNA vaccines and so on that don't have needles. Anyway, what are the promising technical approaches and the plausible timelines for these, both in the US and abroad?
Well, there are a couple, thank you for that question. There are a couple of approaches to the evolution of variants. One of them is to actually boost against the wild type virus. And the reason we see that, because the higher the titer of antibodies, we find that even when a variant comes along and diminishes the efficacy of the vaccine by 2, 3, or 4-fold, there's still enough cushion in the effectiveness of the vaccine that it spills over and protects against this new variant. The other approach is one that we've already started in phase 1 and 2A trials, and that is to make a boost that is specifically directed at the variant in question. The one that we're directing it at is the one that is the most problematic for us right now. Theoretically, it's not dominant in the country, but theoretically it could be the most problem, and that's the South African isolate, the 351. The ultimate end game, when you talk about the next generation, would be what we call a universal SARS-CoV-2 vaccine and ultimately a universal coronavirus vaccine. And there are a number of ways of doing that. We have important and new platform technologies, and we believe, for example, that we can apply the mRNA technology to get to that goal of getting a broad response against all possible variants. These are activities that have already started with the funding that has been generously given to us by the Congress.
And are you also continuing to experiment either in the US or abroad with different dosing regimens? For example, given the phenomenal effectiveness in children of the mRNA vaccines, at least one of the mRNA vaccines, are you considering looking at giving 2 half doses or maybe only 1 dose to children and see if that is effective? Because obviously, even if we choose not to do it in the US, it will have huge advantages to the rest of the world if you can demonstrate that that sort of approach actually works.
As part of the dose, as part of the age de-escalation, which means that, for example, we know now for the Pfizer that the 12 to 15-year-olds, there was essentially 100% efficacy of that vaccine. But when you do an age de-escalation and you go from 12 to 9 years old, 9 to 6, 6 to 2, and 6 months to 2 years, there will be a dose de-escalation also on that. And perhaps Dr. Kessler can comment further on that.
Getting the dose right in children is absolutely essential. And in fact, one of the reasons why it takes longer in kids is because collecting that data is being undertaken right now. And that's, while we will have, I am confident, again, I don't want to get out ahead in front of FDA and the ACIP, but we will likely have a vaccine for adolescents from 12 to 16 over the next several months. But the younger age groups, in order to get that dose data, it will take longer.
Thank you. And I believe my time has expired and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Meliotakis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to continue the conversation regarding our schools. And as I mentioned, the CDC had recommended a $23 billion cost to reopen. That was their estimation. In December, In that COVID bill, there was $64 billion, almost nearly triple the amount of money that was needed. And then in this last package, they put in another $110 billion, which would be 8 times the amount that the CDC estimated it would cost. Now, my question for you is, because New York City school system is still basically closed. Yes, there's some in-person instruction, elementary schools, and some at the middle school level, but the reality is if the CDC is recommending 5 days a week in-person instruction, what can you do to assist us to get that message to the local level? Because this is really having an impact, and as Dr. Fauci is from the community, from the city that I represent, so he understands maybe the impact that this is having. But from a medical standpoint, I mean, we're talking about COVID, but then this is creating all sorts of other issues: nutrition, obesity, school athletics remains shut down. I can't get 12 kids in a hockey league to be able to play. Just nonsensical stuff that we're seeing. And I understand it's a local decision, and it's about local management, but what can you and the administration do to try to talk some sense into the leadership in New York City to get our schools open, get school athletics back on track? Children, you've seen across the country, sadly, committing suicide. This is having a mental health, another public health crisis that's being created as a result. Parents are trying to go to work. You know, it's really hard, particularly on single mothers. The after-school centers are closed. I mean, what can we do as a federal government, as an administration, to try to, are you meeting with them? Are you communicating with them regularly? Are you visiting with these chancellors on the local level to come up with a plan to meet this 100-day goal that the president sent that we're about to reach any day now?
So we put forward this operational guidance. We've been collaborating with the Department of Ed. We have been talking to the teachers' unions, and we've been talking to individual states. What I can say is that the guidance speaks to all of the layered mitigation strategies that need to be in place in order for this to be safely done. And schools are working towards that in many of these places. I do want to say that we have definitively said that schools should be the first place to open and the last place to close. Many of the outbreaks associated with children are happening on the athletic field. They are happening in wrestling, they are happening in hockey, they are happening in basketball. So we have guidance that limits the school sports in the context of hive transmission.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to give Mr. Scalise 30 seconds and the remaining of my time to Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentlelady from New York. Real quick, because there were some comments that were brought up regarding Tucker Carlson, some things that were said, but other parts of the context that were left out. So I did just want to include on Mr. Carlson's show on Wednesday, he did say, quote, "Wait a second, who's doubting that vaccines work? For the record, we never for a minute doubted it." He goes on to say, "So when they said this stuff works, we never questioned it." So I think it's important to put that on the record as well, because that was left out, I think a little bit unfairly. Yield back.
Jordan?
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. That was subject I wanted to touch on. We just had a member, I wish he was still here, that's why I tried to ask him a question, Representative Krishnamurthy, actually lobbying for Tucker Carlson, a member of the press, actually lobbying for his statements to be censored. A member of the government telling someone in the press, advocating for someone in the press to have their statements censored. And Dr. Fauci says I'm ranting when I talk about the First Amendment. For goodness sake, you got a member of Congress in the government saying someone in the press should be denied their ability to speak that statement. They should be taken off of Facebook, taken down. This is how scary it's gotten. And the longer it goes, Dr. Fauci, the longer it goes, the scarier it's going to be for the liberties that we as American citizens have. And that has been my point the entire time. I wish the gentleman were still here, but I cannot believe what I heard, where a member of Congress is saying and asking you all a question, and you all won't give the right answer, which is, of course, his statement shouldn't come down. It would have been easy to say, Dr. Fauci, if you actually cared about the First Amendment. Of course, I disagree with his statement. I know you do. I don't know that I disagree with everything he said, because he just was put in context when you get the whole context. But you disagreed with his statement, but you should have said he can say what he wants, shouldn't be taken down. I just respectfully disagree. I yield back to the gentlelady from New York.
The gentlelady's time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, could I just, to clarify it, Congressman Jordan, I definitely think he has the right to say whatever he wants to say. Well, he was talking about things that I think are legal or not legal about taking things down. Why don't we just make it so that you understand very clearly that I think that Tucker Carlson can say whatever he wants to say. It's freedom of speech.
Well, God bless you. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, I would just say, Mr. Jordan, that there's something about this country that we pay entertainers very well. I don't care about how much money they make, but I want them to be recognized as entertainers.
Tucker Carlson is a member of the
Tucker
media.
Carlson.
He's a member of the press.
Tucker Carlson, in my not so humble opinion, is an entertainer. And with that, I'll give 5 minutes to Ms. Waters.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, Dr. Fauci, I'd like to thank you for your courage and your integrity. And I want to ask you about a couple of friends that I have that I think have been considered or is being considered long haulers. Now, they tell me about some of their symptoms. I think one has not gotten the taste and the smell returned. The other one is having, I think, headaches and some other kinds of things. What can they expect? Should they get booster shots? What can be done for the long haulers?
We are now in, that's a great question, Congressman Waters. We are studying very intensively now what is a real and unfortunate syndrome. And that is a certain percentage of people, and we're collecting large cohorts now to find out exactly what that percent is. It ranges in some observational studies from 10% to 20 to 25% of people who have varying levels of involvement of COVID-19. Some are in the hospital, some are in the hospital seriously ill, some are taken care of at home and are out of work or whatever for months. But at the end of the day, when they clear the virus from the body, they have this peculiar persistence of a constellation of symptoms that are unexplainable because the virus is gone, and yet they have profound fatigue, muscle aches, sleep disorders, temperature dysregulation, fast heartbeat called tachycardia, and a thing called brain fog, which means they have difficulty focusing on anything, on a computer or on reading. So what we're trying to do is to find out, A, what is the percent of people? B, is there an underlying common cause of that? Because up to now, on superficial looking, there's no specific laboratory test that's giving us any clues. But it's a real phenomenon, and we're taking it very seriously. As a matter of fact, we've invested $1.15 billion in a multi-institution type of an approach with the NIH, the CDC, multiple institutes within the NIH. It's something we take very seriously.
Well, let me just continue with that. We're talking about the various variants, and we're also hearing some conversation about the possibility of booster shots that may be necessary. Would there be a different booster shot for different variants? For example, you described one coming out of South Africa. Someone alluded to one coming out of Brazil. We've heard about the UK. Would you think that if we have to have booster shots, it may be different kinds of booster shots depending on the variant that's a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one of the things I try to address in a partial answer to one of the questions. There are a couple of ways of looking at variants. One is to boost against what we call the wild type, the underlying original one. If you get it high enough, it could spill over into protection to the variant. The other is to specifically make a boost against the variant. The problem with that is that if you get more and more variants, that's almost like playing whack-a-mole. You hit this one, then you go to the other one, you go to the other one. And that's the reason why what we're putting a lot of effort in is to try and get a more universal vaccine that would cover all different types of variants. That's the ultimate end game. But until then, we're trying to isolate and find out what the most damaging or potentially dangerous variant is, and to make a special boost against that. And that's what we're doing.
That's very good to hear, and I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to that because without having any specific scientific knowledge, I just think that there may come a time when we have to have booster shots. Now, having said that, I want to talk just a bit about something right here at home. That's very simple. The members of Congress are congregating in the elevators. They pile in the elevators. And when I am on an elevator and it stops, I will only let 2 other people on because I won't ride with more than 3. And some say, well, I've had shots, so I'm wearing my mask. What advice do you have for us to basically be more safe and to be fine examples of what to do to prevent the virus?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to be done. I think we should encourage all members of Congress to get vaccinated, because I think that would be really good for their own personal protection as well as for the community of the Congress. The other thing is that what we do in some of our federal buildings, I know we do it at the NIH. When you have the elevator, they have these things here that are corner and they say no more than 4 if the elevator is a certain size, and no more than 2 if it's a much smaller size. And it actually works, and people abide by that, and they respect that. And I think that's a good thing if we can get that done.
Thank you for your advice. Again, I appreciate you so very much. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. For yielding back, the chair now recognizes Ms. Miller Meeks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Walensky, since this pandemic started, as a physician and former director of the Iowa Department of Public Health, I have referred to this as life versus life. Not life versus the economy, not life versus liberty, but life versus life. At that time, I said that we would see, with hospitals closed, with businesses closed, childcare closed, that we would see increased deaths from cancer treatments not being given, also cancer not being detected, from drug overdose, suicide, depression, mental health, and now we have certainly that data. We have San Francisco Chronicle published earlier this year that the rate of drug overdose deaths, even with Narcan being rapidly dispensed and in the public, was over 30% higher than it had been the year before. We also know same statistics out of Japan. We also know from Las Vegas that having closed their schools, what forced the Las Vegas School District to open their schools was the publication that in the New York Times that from March 16th to June 30th of 2020, there were 6 suicides in young children, and between July 1st and December 31st, there were additional 12, 18 suicides, the youngest of which was 9 years old, which is tragic. So my question for you is, do you know how many excess deaths, not COVID, but excess non-COVID related deaths have been incurred during this past year?
There was an MMWR report out today, actually, that describes from January 2020 to February 2021, excess deaths of about 500,000, about 75% of which are attributable to COVID.
Thank you. So excess deaths of 500,000, which is somewhat similar to what we have. So thank you for that.
75 of which are attributable to COVID, so that's the same.
Non-COVID related excess deaths was what I was asking, but I'll go to my next question, but thank you for that. I was at the border earlier this week in the Rio Grande Valley sector, and thank you, Representative Waters, for bringing up congregating in the elevators and crowding. Because when I was there at the Donna processing facility, that facility was at 420% capacity. They had brought it down from 5,000 per day to 3,500 per day. The facility was not built for that. While I was there, as a woman and a mother, I was concerned about young women being smuggled into the country, brought across without any parental support or parental guidance, and asked them about pregnancy, rape, sexual assault. And they informed me that the week before they had an 11-year-old girl recently pregnant and a girl between 11 and 15 who the day she arrived at that facility gave birth to twins. So does pregnancy put individuals or these young people, they're not being tested for COVID, we already know that. but does it put them at a higher risk for severe illness from COVID-19?
Epidemiologic studies say that outcomes of COVID in pregnant women are increased ICU risk and other things.
Okay. And does the overcapacity in the shelter put them at higher risk for COVID-19?
Crowding is a risk for COVID-19.
So I've been working on vaccine hesitancy throughout. As soon as the vaccine, and thank the previous administration and President Trump for getting the vaccine to this point in time, but it's really the nation's vaccine, not a particular president's vaccine. And working on that, and even this weekend on Saturday was able to vaccinate 20 young individuals who were attending a meeting. And so we've talked about vaccine hesitancy and the need to get across that, but I'm wondering if, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce this article into the record, if I may, from September of 2020, when Dana Bash asked Vice President Harris if she would get the vaccine, and quote, "I would say that I would not trust Donald Trump, and it would have to be a credible source of information that talks about the efficacy and the reliability of whatever he's talking about. I will not take his word for it." Is this the kind of information you think that also contributes to vaccine hesitancy?
I think we all have a role to get vaccinated, and I would encourage everybody to get vaccinated with the FDA-authorized vaccines.
So I fully respect her freedom of speech, as Dr. Fauci respects Tucker Carlson's, but I think, yes, it's incumbent upon all of us to be transparent, to be ethical, to give information, and this also applies to the how we handled the J&J vaccine as well, to the pause. Thank you so much, and again, I appreciate all of you being here in your testimony today.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes to close the second round of questioning. I wish to say that I remember the statement made by Vice President Harris, but I also seem to remember that she had a very public vaccination, very public. She and the president as well. I'm old enough to remember the Tuskegee experiment, and I know what hesitancy that has caused. I'm also remembering the polio vaccines, one being a shot, which we owe to the genius of Dr. Jonas Salk. The other being a little drop of serum on a lump of sugar, owed to the genius of Albert Sabin. I need not tell you which one of those was preferred. And so I would not have to explain to you which community got what vaccine. And that is why the Vice President was so public with her vaccination. And that is why I was very public with mine, having received my second one on January 7th. As you can imagine, being the day after January 6th, my mind was on a lot more than the vaccination, but I thought it serious enough to have that vaccination done on that day in the same place that had been ranshackled the day before. And I think it's important, in my opinion, that we recognize mask mandates and closures, and though it seems as if a few of my colleagues here believe that mask mandates and closures haven't helped save lives. That's what they've said here. I'd like to know, Dr. Fauci, would you agree with that?
I believe that mask mandates have helped.
How about you, Dr. Walensky?
I agree with Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Kessler?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to thank the experts here for that, and I would hope that the public looking in or listening in on the sharing today will take to heart the fact that the scientists, the people who have spent their lives in this field, saving lives, will take heed. And as they listen to the words of those who haven't spent a day studying these issues or practicing them, those who spend their time practicing the words of persuasion rather than adhering to the scientific research that got rid of polio and so many other diseases. You know, I've taken my shingles shot. And from what I know about these kinds of diseases, when the scientists tell me that the research says they will be helpful to my comfort and well-being, I'm going to take it, and I urge all of my constituents and all others who may have any confidence in my opinions to please follow the scientists and get vaccinated. With that, are you back? And I will call an end to the second round of questions, and I will now yield to my ranking member for any closing comments he would like to make.
I want to thank Chairman Clyburn for having this hearing. Really appreciate our witnesses for coming. I know for Dr. Fauci, been back a few times. When you look at some of the conversations we've had, I know when I listen to constituents of mine, they want to follow the science and get back to their lives as best as they can. And we're over a year into this now. We see some states who have opened more broadly using science, and some states that have stayed shut down, in many cases going against the science. And again, you can look at the chart. The states that are the most closed down right now have some of the highest incidence of COVID transmission. And you look at number 50, out of 50, Texas is probably one of the most open states. So the science shows and the data shows that you can safely reopen. Some are just choosing not to. And that's really where we get to the concern. When you look at some states that are practicing more political science while ignoring medical science, that's what angers so many of us. You look at school reopenings, and I appreciate Dr. Fauci and Dr. Walensky both said, if you follow the CDC guidance, which says socially distance and wear a mask, every school should be open today. And yet about half of our schools in America are not educating kids in the classroom. And the science is real clear on this. Long-term damage is being done to those kids. Some are committing suicide. Some are turning to drugs. Some have lost a generational ability to have the same opportunity as anyone else. This is a national disgrace. 10 years from now, people are going to look back and go, how did America let that happen to a generation of kids where for over a year they did not learn the same way as everybody else in America learned? When you watch a teachers union head send his kids to private school while telling the teachers in the public school system that they shouldn't teach kids in the classroom. You want to talk about racial disparity in this country? This is a national disgrace that's occurring before our very eyes. And instead of waiting 10 years and looking back on, how did we lose a generation of millions of young kids? Let's do something about it now. Every one of us should be able to stand up, Mr. Chairman, Republican and Democrat. Say whatever you think of unions, whatever you think of school choice. If your school system doesn't want to educate your kids in the classroom and the science says do it, absolutely do it. If you want to take their money and not educate their kids, shouldn't you be able to take that money somewhere else where they're willing to educate your kid? Because your kid's going to lose his opportunity at life if this goes on. So much damage has already been done. We've got to undo the damage. And the science, the medical science, backs it up. The American Academy of Pediatrics, CDC. You don't need to look far. You don't need to reinvent the wheel because it's out there. What you can do to open schools today. You don't need billions more dollars. We've spent billions of dollars to reopen schools. The bill that was passed, the $1.9 trillion massive spending bill, over 90% of which had nothing to do with COVID medicine, the money going to schools wasn't even dedicated to opening schools. And so people would beg the question, what's the money for then? Because I want my kid back in school. It's denying that kid opportunity. They're committing suicide. We ought to be concerned about those numbers. Then let's turn to the border. And again, I appreciate the testimony from our witnesses, because when confronted with the pictures that the Biden administration will not let the press see, the Biden administration is keeping the press out of this facility in Donna. It's a national disgrace what's going on there. But more importantly, as both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Walensky attested, it's a violation of CDC guidelines. When you got a facility designed for 250 people with over 4,000 crammed in it, kids on top of kids, that's a violation of every CDC protocol out there. And this isn't some private sector entity, because your business would be shut down in America if you were doing this. But because the Biden administration is running it and keeping the press out, it remains open today. Last Friday, that was what I saw. Major violation of CDC's own policy when they say in the guidance regarding Mexico, very high level of COVID-19 in Mexico. So if you're an American taxpayer, CDC, and I know Dr. Walensky's backed this up, CDC says before you travel back to the United States, all air passengers coming to the United States, including U.S. citizens and fully vaccinated people, are required to have a negative COVID-19 test. And yet if you come across the border illegally, many of these young kids are given a free airplane ticket with no COVID test. Border Patrol agents telling you at least 10% have COVID in this facility crammed on top of each other, which, as we all know, based on science, way more than 10% are going to walk out onto an airplane with COVID and transmit it to the rest of the country. This is insanity. It has to stop. President Biden, go to the border and see this for yourself, and then pull out your pen and reverse the executive orders you created that have created this national disgrace. Let's solve this based on medical science. I thank again our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. Before we close, I would like to enter into the record a letter the committee has received from Henry Schein Incorporated, and I think we've made that letter available. I would like the United States to enter that into the record. With respect to the role of physicians and dentists in the vaccine rollout, I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Ranking Member, that it be entered into the record. As a former public school teacher I have a daughter who followed me into that arena and recently retired as a public school teacher, a second daughter serving on the board of our public school district board of commissioners. Today is here, and it reassures me that under the leadership of this administration, we're on the right track toward overcoming the coronavirus pandemic. All of us want to see our children back in school, but we want our children back in school safely with teachers. We've had the vaccinations and all others with whom they may come in contact. Millions of Americans are being vaccinated every day. And just days from now, all adults will be eligible to receive a vaccine. We are prioritizing equity and increasing vaccine access in low-income, minority, and rural communities. In addition to our vaccination program, the federal government continues to expand testing, and critical supplies are going where they are needed most. research into the disease continues, we can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. It is in the distance, but I think we're finally beginning to see it, because we're leading with science instead of politics. And that's what has made this possible. We place our trust in our country's best doctors, scientists, and public health experts, and we have guided us, and they have guided us out of this chaos and confusion. I'm glad that we could hear from Dr. Walensky on her work to restore the CDC's reputation as the world's preeminent public health organization after the Trump administration tarnished the agency by bullying scientists and altering scientific reports. We must commit today to never again allow politics to interfere with the public's health. Despite significant progress in vaccinations and a decrease in deaths over the last several months, the pandemic is not yet over. Almost 5,000 people died from the virus this past week alone, and more contagious variants are spreading fast. If we're not careful, thousands of lives will be lost that could have been saved. We heard today that we must do what we must do to save lives. We must continue to wear masks and avoid crowds until all Americans have had an opportunity to be fully vaccinated. And we must overcome vaccine hesitancy so that all Americans benefit from the
Someone said, Destiny, lack of empathy can be absolutely advantageous, though. For example, people can get too wrapped up in others' problems. I would hate to be that sort of person for empathy. Some level of empathy is required. If you don't have some level of empathy, I think you're incompatible with human society, and I wouldn't want like anybody like that to be in human society. It would be too scary. People without empathy would probably be capable of doing like horrible, horrible, horrible things. You shouldn't want, like, empathy is most likely, I would say, as somebody that doesn't believe in like real morality, empathy is probably the building block or the foundation on which you start to build a successful society. A bunch of people without empathy would be too prone to malfeasance or taking advantage of or fighting over other people, such that you really wouldn't want those people to be involved in your society.
I like the way your breast feel against my chest.
Okay, maybe you probably shouldn't be saying that. And it's like, okay, well, at least he's gonna maybe end it. He'll end it with a good hand kiss and then walk away. Okay. Oh, okay, maybe just a cheek. Maybe just one on the cheek is not bad. Okay, the other cheek is okay. I don't know about the forehead. Okay, yeah, you kind of, Drake, you.
Your basic take is that, like, federally, a $15 minimum wage might not be such a good thing, right? It should be left up to like kind of like state and local authorities.
My ultra black pill take on minimum wage, and I don't know if this is possible to do, the ultra black pill take is that different people should be getting paid different wages. That's the ultra black pill take. So like the problem that I have with minimum wage is there's two huge problems. One is that it treats all geographies the same, and two is that it treats all earners the same. So number one is that the first one is obvious. A minimum wage in Seattle probably needs to be a lot different than the minimum wage in Des Moines, right? That's obvious. But the second thing is that the minimum wage of an earner that is like a high school worker versus a single mom that with a family of 3 that she's taking care of, the wage necessities for these people are very different. And I think that minimum wage is just a very blunt hammer that's trying to do a very precise thing. It's my problem.
Sure. I see what you're saying. I think in terms of some of the economic research I've seen, and especially there's people that I know even chat's throwing out Aaron Dube, some of the things they looked at, and actually Sockdown left. I forgot, I kept mentioning this to you yesterday, but you had the debate with Vosh. Socialism Done Left, I think, does a really good job in terms of just to pivot really quick, does a really good job in terms of providing evidence-based leftism, even though I'm not a lefty.
The Sockdown Left guy is sick.
Yeah. So one thing I guess that if you were to talk to the NOAA guy or even Medlock or any of them going forward, something that they constantly bring up is monopsony labor markets, which I think you're aware of, right? You know what that is?
Is monopsony basically you basically have a de facto monopoly because of reasons that are inhibiting other participants in the market from accurately competing or whatever?
So monopoly, monopoly is basically an instance where an entity is the main producer, distributor, right? And then monopsony is the other way around. Basically, it's the main buyer of said goods or services. So monopsony labor markets are essentially where there's a bunch of workers and essentially one employer.
Yeah. So say for instance you have a city, right? And your workers can't actually go around and shop for different wages because they don't have say public transportation to get somewhere or whatever, right?
Right, and essentially in that case, some of the research that I've seen has showed that essentially it could be possible that in a monopsony labor market, which is also the case for many smaller cities, a higher minimum wage could actually lead to more employment, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But there's a lot of integral stuff that goes into that. So if you ever talk to Noah or Medlock or any of those guys, I'm sure they'd be able to better explain it than me.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. One thing that's probably important I see this said a lot, it's probably true, is that minimum wage, so people will talk about minimum wage doesn't have any negative impacts whatsoever on the market or anything like that, or unemployment or whatever, right? Minimum wage has probably been overwhelmingly positive because it's been so low. I don't know if we would see the same effects if we went to a 15 an hour national minimum wage. That might be a little bit too intense.
Yeah, and I know there's many people that will bring up other countries and they'll be oh, look at this country, or look at Sweden, Norway, whatever. In the Nordic countries, they actually have really strong unions, which allows them to have collective bargaining agreements, and they also have sectoral unions or sectoral bargaining, which is something we don't have here. We have enterprise level unions. So that's a big distinction there. I think overall, I don't know if you saw, because you were busy or you've been busy, there was a CBO report that came out yesterday that said essentially 1.4 million jobs would be lost to a $15 minimum wage, but the amount of people that would be brought out of poverty would be something close to 900,000. So yeah, there is definitely it's not a zero-sum game, right? As you always say, in economics.
Of course, yeah. The only thing that scares me there is that when you find policies that benefit the aggregate, but leave some people behind, it's usually the people at the bottom that get more and more and more fucked. That's my issue. Is that but you're saying lift people out of poverty. I'm curious how that would be defined, because my gut reaction is that a 15 an hour minimum wage would probably be beneficial among a lot of decently paid low skill workers, but the people at the very, very bottom would just get pushed out of the market completely. That would be my guess if I had to guess.
Sure, that's entirely possible. But the thing is, the way people view labor markets commonly is just through a common supply and demand graph, right, or curve. In that, labor markets are much more complex than that. There's always factors that you can't account for. So in the research, right, the monopsony power labor markets,
sure.
From what I've seen, it seems like there is an increase in employment when the minimum wage is higher, because essentially there's the
I don't disagree with that. But there's probably a limit to that, right? So for instance, being very hyperbolic, we probably wouldn't be able to do a 50 an hour minimum wage. right?
Right.
That would probably fuck this. Like my curiosity is just where is that limit? Because like, especially in a monopsony where you can't sell your labor to anybody else because you're fucked, right? That's so like in that case, a higher minimum wage would probably be beneficial. Another thing that might actually boost wages actually is maybe initiatives push for better public transportation. If people could actually get to like different jobs like easier, maybe that would actually push people to get higher wages because then people would have to raise wages to compete for workers more. You know, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. Yeah.
And I think like overall, like pushing for a higher minimum wage shouldn't be the hill to die on. Like I think we should, or at least like in terms of like Biden or like whoever else, like right, the lib left or whatever, we should be pushing for more like social welfare spending and like stuff like that. Like I don't think minimum wage hikes or whatever should be the hill like we die on.
Yeah, probably not. Do you have any idea how fucking sick the dating market would be if this is gonna sound like some real insult shit, but if guys got together and just started like sucking off the bros and shit, do you know how much harder women would have to step up their game? If you had to go, do you know all the games you have to play with chicks sometimes? Well, to play with chicks sometimes to like fucking, you know, bang a bitch, like if you're just like, dude, I'm gonna go fucking hang out with Mark and we're gonna give each other way better blowjobs than you can. We've been sucking each other out since we were fucking, 15 years old. I'm not playing this dumbass fucking game with you. You don't wanna split the check? Fuck that shit.
Well, like gays are the ultimate bros. Not only do they not compete for women, they take another dude with them.
Exactly. Oh shit, dude. Do you know how much more competitive the sexual marketplace would get?
So I wanted to touch up on one thing that I brought up yesterday in the minimum wage discussion because I got dragged on it on Twitter for not mentioning it.
Oh no. Dragged on Twitter? What?
Well, because like I talked to like Liz and all those people,
Big
and
mistake.
they told me, and they told me I forgot to mention this. So one of the key things is on Dube's literature, which I think I mentioned to you yesterday. The research. In general, they found that the minimum wage isn't harmful if it's below about 60% of the median wage. So that's one thing that I forgot to bring up. So as long as the minimum wage is about 60% of the median wage, it doesn't really seem to have such a negative impact on employment. So, yeah.
Okay, it's possible. That sounds a little suspect to me. Like, I wonder if that's causal, or if that just is like how those labor markets tend to be. But that could be the case. I guess I don't know. It seems reasonable enough. I could think of reasons why that wouldn't be true, and if somebody told me it was true, I wouldn't like immediately think it's not true. But sure.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like unfortunately, like I am not in the position to like argue for that. But I think like I said yesterday, Noah does a good job, and then even like the Aaron Dube guy, if you ever wanted to check out his work. And then I just had one like quick thing, if that's cool with you, because I don't want to hog up the time.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So I was really happy that you talked to Kraut yesterday. And I know chat's gonna shit on me because I always mention this, but I'm friends with Kraut, and I like his content, and I like your content. But the one thing I guess that like Kraut and I talk about too, especially, is do you think like, and this is a do you think question, but do you think like the political extremism online, so like people jumping from like far right
to far left,
to like far, yeah, do you think like going forward like that's gonna be something, I don't know, like in terms of like not sustainable, but do you think that's something that's like eventually gonna have such negative consequences?
I mean, I think it already does have negative consequences. It's really, really, really bad.
Yeah, I feel like I was in that position, not really, like a couple years, 4 years ago when I was 16, I like was a Trump supporter or whatever, because it was cool like in high school to like be like, oh, I like Trump. And then I kind of like started to find like my political beliefs. So I've always kind of been now in like the left or like left of center like ideology for like the last 3 or 4 years. Like that's what I like have researched and done stuff like that. But I think like I think my problem is like and I don't want to call people out, but I think like people like Seanhead do such like a great harm to like online politics.
Yeah, because they just bounce around for whatever's like the extremist, trendiest, whatever.
Yeah. I feel like promoting like if you're promoting like really far right stuff, because Seanhead was like really bad too. Like she literally defended Ethan Ralph or whatever. And I know you've gone on his podcast, but that guy's like an actual like Holocaust denier.
He's something else. Yeah.
So yeah, that's super cringe, but then to see her like totally revamp her politics and now be like this super like far left like Bernie bro, it's just kind of weird to me. Yeah, I don't know if it's like if they're like grifting or if they like actually believe in what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He says that he would only consider dating people that are objectively unattractive. Have you had this conversation before with him?
I have not.
Oh my God, this is a misrepresentation of my personal okay?
Oh, Destiny.
Mega yikes to me in the chat.
Ah, Jesus. This was a discussion about my heuristics when interacting with women at anonymously at bars, right? We did not meet anonymously, nor at a, well, actually we did meet at a bar.
Yeah, so Stanley basically, wait, hold on, wait. No, so I'm just curious. I'm sorry, I can clear Stanley here real fast. Stanley says that he only approaches unattractive women. Did you approach him or did he approach you?
It wasn't really.
Steven, you're killing me, dude.
It wasn't really.
Where does modern day socialism come from? I do not remember it being fashionable 10 years ago, but right wing has always existed. I don't really think that most socialists are socialists. I don't think most of them don't know what any of it means or the implications of any of it. I think that what we find, here's my riveting historical political analysis. My guess is that there's probably a more simple observation that could be made. There are probably like trends of populism that kind of flow and ebb and flow in society. And I think right now, or at least over the past like 10 years, we've kind of been like on an uptick of populism. And I think right now it just kind of, I think it's just kind of, it needs a vehicle, and the current vehicle is like socialism. Like, depending on how the wind blows, I think that any of these like socialist people could just as easily be Nazbols, you know? Like, I think it's just whatever the best populist driving vehicle is at the time. Do you think the uptake in populism is probably because of more internet access and lack of fact checking? Good question. Who knows?
My theory here is that you have people who travel from across the world to come to the iconic Times Square balls drop. The iconic.
That'd be appropriate for an audience of Fortnite fans, though, huh? I'm sorry. Okay, keep going.
Do you think it has to do with the focus of the rhetoric? Like and I see this a lot, and I think it's probably one of the biggest differences between people on the left and people on the right, where the focus of the rhetoric of the left is who's responsible for the betterment of society. It's not the individual. It's the government. It's the society as a whole, as a group.
Sure.
Whereas the personal responsibility side is the conservative side, so-called. So maybe that's at the root, right? They've grown up.
Yeah, but I guess I just would have wished that, like, it's hard for me to imagine that people could actually be so one-dimensional about that. Like, there's varying levels of responsibility depending on what the problem is and depending on what our abilities are, right? That seems like it would be pretty obvious to me, but.
Oh, I totally agree. But I see it all the time, especially with people with huge platforms. Like, I listen to some Joe Rogan, and he talks about how he wants to see the nation as a giant community and everybody taking care of each other, but he doesn't mean him. Mm-hmm. He means that we would pay our taxes, and then the government would do this thing and create this utopian community to make sure everybody's cared for. But in practice, it has to be each individual has to take care of what's happening around them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I don't think I disagree.
Yeah, I just think it was a something that I've always seen. It's not a mystery, I think. I think it's just it's born out of the kind of thinking that you're brought up in, I think.
Oh, sure, depending on the political affiliation you have. Or depending, I guess, on the type of talking to you get, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't live there now, but you grew up essentially as a conservative Christian, went libertarian, went left, but all of your, if I met you and talked to you and didn't know you were an atheist, I wouldn't think you were.
Yeah, sure, I would, hope so, yeah.
Enjoy arguing semantics. You're going to continue to lose and get done.
I know. I feel like I'm losing so hard over here with my 14,000
Sorry,
viewers.
hold on,
Holy
Let me
shit.
get up. I don't want to hit
Oh,
Destiny with
man.
my balls when I leave the room.
Don't worry, my dude. They have to descend from your body before you can hit anybody with them first.
Do you think that most people will analyze an event or an action on their own moral framework first, or do you think that they just default to whatever their ideology or whatever their favorite content
Ideology.
creator?
I would say less than 5% of people have any coherent moral framework by which they analyze what's good or bad.
Okay. And sort of to tack onto that, at that point, do you think that having moral arguments with people has really any point? Because it seems to me like there's just too much subjectivity in most,
I guess
specific
like,
moral stances.
yeah, I guess the goal would be to make people think a little bit. That would be like the dream. Is it like, oh, like I'd never actually considered that before. I guess people meme about it now, but that was the original point of like the incest argument. It's like, here's something that is just on its face so obviously wrong, but then, tasked with providing like an actual cognitive reason why it's wrong. It was very uncomfortable and very challenging to do so. I was like, oh, well, maybe this just makes you think a little bit. That was like the whole goal of that argument, basically, yeah.
Yeah, but the issue with that is like you never really change anyone's mind with that, though, right? So
well,
what's
the
really
goal
the
is
point?
that like, well, you're never gonna change somebody's mind. It's just to kind of like get that process started. That like maybe you think a little bit about like, oh, well, like I don't have an answer to that, and maybe that like spurs you on into thinking about like other things. It's like, oh, well, I'm gonna consider this, and maybe I'll consider that or whatever. Maybe that's just like the catalyst, I guess. But the goal of like an argument like that isn't to like make somebody pro incest or something, right? It's more just to kind of get them to look at how they view morality, in a slightly different way.
Yeah, okay. I get
Have
that.
incest that doesn't involve inbreeding or unhealthy power dynamics. It's possible, right? Like every single hamburger, has like let's say something you say like I hate hamburgers, okay? But you actually, and then I say, well, why do you hate hamburgers? And you go, well, because ketchup is disgusting and mustard is disgusting and onions are fucking gross and I don't like buns either. Well, okay, well, you haven't told me why hamburgers are disgusting because you can just have a hamburger without any of that other stuff, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Even though oftentimes hamburgers are served with ketchup or mustard, it's not intrinsic to being a hamburger.
I wasn't expecting that comeback.
Okay.
I honestly was. I that fucked me. You got me there, man, I guess. Fuck. Shit.
Cranium Bone Party. What is up, dude?
I've been having a question I've been wanting to ask you for a while.
Well, you know what? What a perfect opportunity for you to be in my Discord channel with the opportunity to ask me a question.
Here, let me mute the stream real quick so I don't...
Be my guest.
So, I guess one question I've had for a long time is, do you ever talk to somebody and you kind of they're not clicking on all the same gears? Like, how do you know that you're more intelligent than somebody? And do you ever feel like that kind of separates yourself from other people?
It's not really a question I ever try to consider. Whether or not you are not more intelligent than somebody, I don't think is, one, it's very hard to even know that. And then two, I don't think it's relevant to most discussions, right?
Well, I don't know. I guess the thing is I consider you somebody who's ridiculously intelligent.
Wow,
yeah, don't let it go to your head. But, it's you debate a lot of these people and it just seems like they can't even grasp things on, a basic level. And so do you just ever encounter people where you're how do they function in society?
I mean, I think it's important to understand that whether or not I consider myself to be smarter or dumber than any other individual, the people's inability to grasp something isn't usually related to their intelligence. Usually there's something else going on. I don't think I cover any topic on my stream that is just so absurdly complicated that only my massive brain can understand it. I think it's more just the reason why people don't engage with what I'm saying has more to do with they're either ideologically bought into something or they're emotionally connected to some point rather than oh, well, their brain is just too small to understand the marketplace of ideas that I'm throwing at them.
Maybe intelligence isn't the right word, but I don't know. Sorry.
I forgive you.
And then I guess just another question I had was, as far as David Pakman goes, are you friends with him or what's your relationship?
I mean, we're friendly. I don't know if we talk enough to be considered friends, but I like him. I'll go out and eat with him and hang out and stuff and chat with him anytime I want. So yeah, if you consider that a friend, then yeah, we're friends.
I was just curious because I thought he had a really kind of bad take on circumcision. I was curious if you had ever seen his take on that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty dog shit. But a lot of people are very personally invested in the outcome of that argument. So what are you gonna do?
All right. Well, thanks for answering my questions. Appreciate it.
No problem, dude. I appreciate you. I hope you feel appreciated today.
I just want to thank you. You've given me the arguments I needed to maintain an incestuous relationship with my sister. So thank you.
No problem, buddy.
I know you talk about it a lot when you're kind of like saying why you feel like people watch you, and you don't feel like anything you necessarily say is super unique or anything like that. But at the same time, when you talk about like why people watch you, you talk about stuff like your aesthetic, that the way you talk about things is kind of unique, the sort of like analogies you use and stuff. So that it kind of feels like, on one hand, you acknowledge that you have a very unique sort of style of talking about stuff, but then you also like say that, well, most people should be thinking like this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a unique in terms of like entertainment, I would agree. But when it comes to something like having integrity as a person, I thought that these concepts were a lot more universal, I guess.
Well, so one thing in the past like year, right, you didn't realize that local stuff had as much of an impact, and then you sort of changed on that. And then as a result of that, you started doing the canvassing stuff. I think there is that's like probably not that unique of like a problem to run into. That I would imagine that there's other content creators, maybe like lefties, who don't realize that they can have like a larger impact with their sort of brand or something like that, similar to like how you didn't realize like you could actually have this sort of impact on stuff.
I guess it feels a little bit different to me though, when it feels like these people are literally like constantly advocating for a change and the entire organization of the world, and then on top of that saying that like the world is ready for a change entirely too, right? Like a lot of these people are saying that like Americans are ready for a progressive revolution, we're going to lead, or we need a revolution, and then they don't do anything in their lives to show that they want a revolution, which just seems kind of weird to me.
I mean, I think you would agree, right, that the level of people ready for this sort of change is like definitely not at the place where it needs to be for there to be like any sort of actual changes, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Wait, give me 1 second, okay? Hold on, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, so no, I was talking about how like right now there isn't that sort of like obviously popular like political will to kind of like affect what they're trying to do right now, right?
But that's what they say though. They keep claiming that. That's one of my biggest disagreements with a lot of these people. They keep saying like all of America or the majority of America wants certain policies. They're ready for these types of things, but like politicians aren't acting on it. It's like, okay, well then do something.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I guess the messaging there is a little bit off. The only thing I'd say is that I would say probably at this point, like messaging is like by far and away like the biggest thing that they could do as a content creator to try and get people to their side now.
I mean, like in a holistic, like overall worldview thing, but I feel like doing individual acts of service or doing things that make, like when I spread a message, I imagine I'm making like incremental improvements in a lot of people's lives, but direct action helps me make massive improvements in like a few people's lives. I don't know. I feel like that's something that should naturally extend from what you do. It might be, you might be right that maybe people just don't know what to do maybe. And I guess if that's the case, then hopefully they spend a little bit more time thinking about it, but.
Really quick, so I just wanted to ask chat, like, do you guys feel like Destiny is like relatively unique in the way he conducts himself? Like, I don't know many content creators, but
I'm sure that there are a lot of things that are unique about me for sure. That's not something that I'm like going to contest. Like I always tell people like, oh, like if you're going to be like a streamer, like you should have something unique about you. Of course, obviously I know that, but there are certain principles that I argue for, certain concepts I argue for that I don't think should be that unique. Like, and that might just be an upbringing. Like for me to say like if you have certain principles, those should be reflected in the way that you live. That I like if you would have asked me, if you poll a group of 100 people, how many would agree with that statement? My assumption would be like 85 plus would just like de facto agree with that without even a second.
I agree that a lot of people would agree with that, but what that looks like in practice for a lot of people might differ because they don't think about like that sort of like how that plays out.
But that's not what other people have argued. Like I could agree in practice. There are a lot of things that I've done in my life that have been bad things, immoral things, and stupid things, and dumb things, and I continue to make mistakes. Like I'm not going to sit and argue I'm perfect all the time, but I would never argue that oh well, I should do bad things or that I shouldn't have to do good things. Like I think that's the difference.
I guess at the end of the day, it just you're already at that conclusion base, and it's just I feel like realizations kind of like with the canvassing thing, those are like stuff that people still have to get through, And just because you're easily able to come to that sort of conclusion doesn't mean that other people are. And I know you've also talked about it in the past that you don't like to think like, well, I have to like baby everyone and bring them to all these conclusions and stuff. But yeah, like, I mean, Booksmarts was talking about it earlier too, that like, yeah, it's just the way that you've, been brought up and like the way you think about things like leads you to these places, but it's like not as obvious to others. So it's just like, I don't know if that's, yeah. Okay. The other thing was do you feel like, do you hate that other content creators audiences don't like you, like, or like not hate, but like, is that something that's like annoying to you?
I don't mind it when people don't like. Yeah, I don't mind it when people don't like me. I did get really annoyed when people don't like me for stupid reasons. Like if you don't like me because I'm too much of a liberal or whatever, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. But if you don't like me because you think I'm a Nazi, that's really fucking weird to me and pretty annoying. But what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel. The other thing I was just gonna say is that probably is played into a part by like the way you go about your analogies for stuff, and it's just if they were less abrasive, you might run into that less, but I understand that you've also talked about how it's like part of your brain and stuff, but yeah. Okay, thanks.
That's not true. That's just dumb as fuck. Like, okay, sure. Maybe if you have absolutely no money, a fuck ton of debt, absolutely no friends, and absolutely no family, and absolutely no coworkers that can help you move. Maybe those people are fucked, sure. But even at that, it might be worth it to take on a little bit of debt to move out of an area that you can't afford. Like, the most important part of your budget is where you fucking live. What?
Like, probably an econ question.
Okay.
So during COVID, like a lot of the news, it stated that like over 800 small businesses were closing like every day.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they stated, like, it was a problem.
I wonder
like,
if it is. I wonder how many small businesses normally close. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if there were more small businesses closing than not. But anytime I get absolute numbers, it makes me very suspect. I'm not sure. I'm not saying people are lying intentionally, but I'm curious like how many close per day normally, right? Like there's like probably millions of small businesses in the U.S.
Because if you do bad, you just close like any other time. Mm-hmm. My more question: should we, as a society, should we value small businesses over large businesses? Because it seems like when large businesses mess up, there's more liability with lawsuits and other things that you will not get with small businesses.
Yeah, I don't know. I talk about this every now and then, but I don't know. I could just be wrong. Maybe I fucking hate small businesses personally, but I don't know. Maybe there's like good reasons for that. Like all of my worst like experiences working were with fucking small businesses because there's no HR, there's no accountability. The pay is usually shit. The nepotism is unbelievable. Like I don't know. I hate like my personal experience with small business, but I don't know. Maybe there might be in some cases good reasons for them to exist. Maybe they foster innovation in the United States. Maybe,
I feel like
I don't know.
I feel like most small like why people praise small businesses are like because it's local. They like the community feeling, and that's you.
The only time I like small businesses is when they're offering like a very unique service that they being a small business. So like there's a guy in not Sioux Falls, Iowa. I don't remember the city. There's a guy that runs a store called Tenor Madness in Iowa. And that dude is like a master of fucking saxophones. He's just like a god. You can give him a horn and he will be able to do everything with it. And like, if you're in the Midwest, you're going to this guy to get a new horn. Or if you get like a new horn, you're giving it to him to check the intonation, to see if it needs to like bend or break anything or whatever. Like the guy is like, So like in that sense, like I could never go to a big broker or not a big broker, I'm sorry, like a big retail store or something probably and get that level of stuff for that specialty or specialized of a thing. Yeah. So in that case, like small businesses for specialty services are probably really good, I would think, but yeah.
But these are the type of people like during COVID, they're probably not going to close because they're like, they're the only one available, right?
Do what? Say that again?
So during COVID, like they're not a part of the 800 number, right? Like, because
I don't know.
Specialized.
Well, it might be the case, and I don't know. I'm only giving you hypotheses because I don't know. Yeah. But it might be the case that those are actually the first businesses to go under. It might be the case that big businesses enable the survival of small businesses like that because for big businesses, you save enough money that you're able to spend your extra money at a small business. But those small, hyper-specialized businesses might be the first spending to get cut from a household if that household is not getting enough money. Possibly, but maybe not. You know?
Yeah, okay. Because I always see it on the news. I was just wondering, like, I don't know, like people value. I don't go to any small businesses that I can think of, like, but it seems like people just somehow value, like, because when they say the 800 number, they're like, this is a bad thing. We need to like change this. And I personally just don't understand it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's something to think about. Like, there might be, I don't know. Maybe I should read some of it. Yeah. Because My gut is always like pretty. I don't fucking care about small businesses, but there might be really good reasons to do so. Maybe I should spend some more time thinking about that.
Do you consider somebody like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X? Are these SJWs to you, or?
Not to me personally, but that's because I agree with their philosophy.
Okay, so you've literally defined SJW as somebody you disagree with. Like, is that really the definition? That's what you just said.
Yeah, kind of. I think everyone has like someone is an SJW to someone else.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
Because this is where my problem, listen, if you solve this for me, then maybe I become religious tonight. I think the question at the end of the day is like, there's like one of two different types of people. So like you can either believe that black people are more likely to be adversarial to cops or have higher recidivism or more likely to victimize each other because of like social factors that have contributed to this, that there's like a pretty adversarial history between black people and society or black people and the police. Or you can believe that there's some innate quality of a black person that predisposes them towards that. If you believe in the former, like I do, then you seek to reform and move society in a direction as much as you can to make it so that those people feel more accommodated so that crime and other things aren't in the equation for them. If you believe in the latter, then I don't know if you push for eugenics or the deportation of all black people. I don't know at that point like what the plan is, but
a person who, I'm not saying necessarily because that I believe in the latter, but
he goes around debating right-wingers. He has a pretty extensive channel. I know some of you know him, but some of you may not. I've seen a lot of his content. I thought he would be a good person to bring on because he's pretty competent. He's a actually pretty good debater. So I want you all to be introduced to his ideas. I know a lot of us get only like the college SJW compilation kind of.
But the problem is I feel like so many things could tip at that point. So it might be somebody with a lot of money. It also might be somebody that just comes in with a big endorsement. Or it might be somebody that comes in with the endorsement of a major union. It might, like, I feel like there are so many.
Those as advanced.
No, you're not. Don't say that. You're lying if you're saying that. Because if I were to tell you that like a police union endorsement is what determines like who's the mayor of a particular city, I have a feeling you would have a big problem with that as well, right?
I mean, I don't think that like police union endorsements swing major cities.
Oh no, my God. No, police union. Oh no, careful with that. I just asked a quick question, then I won't. Then you guys can talk for as much as you want. Does anybody here have a single example of one major like legislative initiative that the American public was opposed to, the corporations were in favor of, that passed?
I can't bring up like an anecdote, but I can present you a data set.
And the tax cuts. Like you got stumped on those and just gave up on that.
Wait, so
that is nobody. Okay, I think that if you wanted to destroy my argument, I think that, and I look for these. So if someone's fine one and I didn't go for it, I'll change my position. But if you can find something, and not like a 20% of the bill's tax cuts went to like like an actual concrete, like this is a major legislative initiative that most of America opposed, but like corporations supported, and somehow it got through despite the American public.
Yeah. So when I said of
there you go. I sent you.
Okay, so one at a time. One at a time, right? So Justin wants to interact with us.
Please, also real quick, don't email me anything about that horrible Page and Gillen study. Please do something more recent.
No, it's a response to Gillen's and Page.
Or Gillen's and Page.
Net neutrality for one, right?
Net neutrality is a horrible example.
Okay, so hold on, one at a time. Okay, I'm going to call on you. And so you have an example. We wanted to present the desk.
Oh, I have one actually.
Right?
Yeah.
So one at a time. Right. So we'll start with you, Chum, again. Do you have an example?
Yeah, sure. So there's a pretty popular one under Trump. It had about like a 7% public approval rating, and Trump signed it through executive order. It allowed ISPs to sell customers' data to private companies.
Yeah, sure. So executive order does not count as legislative initiative, right? Like if you sign it through executive order, you don't need popular support to pass it. And Trump lost the election. So I mean, like that's.
Wait, how does him losing the election like disprove that? But like him losing the election with, I think the inference that you want to make there is that he lost the election because of popular backlash to this specific thing. But I mean, there's a whole host of reasons that he lost the election. I think the point is just that the corporate lobbying has undue influence, and whether or not it was through a bill or executive action, I think is besides the point there.
If this is an argument, this is an argument for removing like executive order power, not.
Well, no, I think the contention isn't over bills versus executive orders. The contention is about corporations' undue influence on politicians in enacting legislation.
So my issue is whether or not, like, what is the overriding thing here? Is it going to be what voters want, or is it going to be like corporate influence? Like showing me that a president did something via executive action, like whether it was by a corporation or not, is not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is like, can people in Congress, can their views be eroded by corporate lobbying, as opposed to like trying to maintain like a voter loyalty or whatever?
Yeah, well, that's the president, but all right, I'll let other people go.
Okay, and if you think of something else, it's fine. So then I'm going to go to what's the guy in the top left corner? So I don't know. You're new here, so
Lighter up.
Lighter up.
So I think three things off the top of my head come to mind. First, foreign military aid is consistently unpopular, and we consistently fund large amounts of it. Defense spending, also very unpopular, consistently fund large amounts of it.
He's talking specifically things that corporations are in favor of and people are not.
Yeah, defense contractors are corporations. They profit hugely.
Wait, you're telling me, hold on. Wait, real quick, before we just rattle it. So you're telling me that if I look up like military spending United States, like this isn't like massively popular like on the Republican side or anything? You're telling me that like this is like just...
On the Republican side, there's going to be like more popularity for it. But on the whole, if you ask people whether or not they want to decrease foreign military aid and defense spending, they want to decrease it. That's true. And it goes up almost every year. At least during the Trump administration, it went consistently up. During the Obama administration, it went down a bit. But it's been like over 2.5% for like the last 30 years. It's basically at like 1980 Cold War levels, which makes no sense. Like there's a lot that goes on there that I think is indicative. And then you also talked about tax cuts, and you talked about how there's sort of a compromise within that sort of was giving a break to the richest Americans. And I don't really understand why there should be a break being given to something that's not in the public interest. That seems like, even if it's part of a larger bill that some Americans like, why are some Americans being forced to deal with things that are unpopular with the majority of Americans? That seems like a very bad way to conduct our legislative business. And then finally, I also think that like a big part of the way corporate lobbying influences politics is by influencing politicians who then use their platforms to influence the public. And so when they go on and do that, that changes the way the public views an issue. And it often misleads them into viewing an issue in a way that's not sort of understanding it in a way that they sort of lose sight of why the policy might be in their interest. And so I think you kind of discount that in like the way you think about this argument. I think it's an important part of it.
Yeah, so I have to. So the hard part about this is I have to look up like every single point you bring up, because if I just take it off for granted, obviously. So the military spending thing is just 100% dead wrong in terms of like what Americans' favorability. Like right now, we're almost the highest favorability we've ever been for describing the U.S. defense spending. That's if I just assume this one Gallup poll is accurate. There might be other polls that contradict this, but it doesn't look like, for the most part, like. There have been periods in our history where we said it's too much. It seemed like in the 80s we felt that. But then like 96 onward, fairly consistently, we've thought that it's been about right.
But like Destiny, like if you've seen the Gallup poll, well, I don't agree with this specific take. If you see like the huge dip,
why is everyone so fucking loud in Discord? Oh my god!
This was when because how people view the defense spending is influenced by the media they consume, obviously, and there was a huge controversy over the increase of like $60-70 billion in one increase, right? And so like maybe people in their minds currently, like since that isn't in the news anymore, they're not thinking about increases like that happening like so largely at one point in time, and they only were so against like spending at that point in time because like that news was in like the forefront of the national conversation.
Yeah, sure. I don't necessarily disagree with that there's like a complicated link between all of this, but just the idea that just a corporation spending money, like I think it's going to be like a much bigger feedback loop. Whatever's popular at the time, whoever's spending money on it, how politicians are responding to it, what's going on like in the news in terms of world events. I think that like all of this stuff is coming together to form a picture. It's not just a matter of somebody pushing money on one side of things.
Yeah, so like you said earlier, bringing up specific instances, right? So we can bring up instances that are a little bit more strong. So like you said, not to bring up the effects of the tax cuts. I agree. We don't have to look at the effects. We want to look at like how people viewed the bill, like the 2017 tax bill that cut the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21, right? From the Gallup poll, it says this was not popular. Like people did not want this. And it was like overwhelmingly pro-business, right? Because it was a cut to the corporate tax rate, right? So that would be one example, right? But so you said not to bring up Gillens and Page, so I'm going to bring up like the response paper to Gillens and Page, right? That show that Republicans basically do not reflect like their voter base or like advocacy groups, and they basically the only statistical significant like predictor of their policy adoption is business preferences. So like by and large, Republican policy is reflective of business interests and not their voter interests.
Well, then how do they win elections at all?
It's so like there's also really interesting articles that have been written how like Republican voters, one, they vote on certain issues only, like for one like social stuff, and also for a lot of economic stuff, they don't know what their party supports. I think it's like 80% of Republicans think like the Republican base, not like lawmakers, think that the Republican Party is for protecting pre-existing conditions, like in healthcare. Like
wait, I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Like there's this article, I can find it, where they talked about how the Republican base doesn't know what their party supports, like for like economic policy. And one of the examples they brought up was the Republican Party's belief in protecting pre-existing conditions in like health insurance or whatever. When like the Republican lawmakers don't support that, or at least when it was asked, didn't. I think they are more now.
Wait, I thought that. Hold on. If I'm reading this,
is this the same article we're posting?
I'm not posting an article. I'm just posting the Gallup.
No, not article.